The problems facing New Zealand's primary sector have been mounting at a rapid pace. So I think it's time for open hearts and open minds. Welcome to Sarah's Country, to our wonderful returning friends of the show, and I absolutely love how passionate you are tuning in. You know who you are, live each night, Monday to Wednesday from 7 o'clock. It's absolutely fantastic whenever you can tune in live across our social channels and on sarahscountry.com. But I do know that we have an exploding audience on podcast around the world. An absolute privilege that you tune into this show. I'm your host, Sarah Perry, and we certainly have another wonderful episode for you tonight. Collaboration is a very overused word. Are you sick of it? I hear it all the time, and it is a necessary word. Absolutely. We must collaborate more. But just by saying it, our expectation seems to be set with intention, but without a decided outcome whilst saying it, where is it really going to go? I just was thinking about this as we were creating a bit of collaboration in the kitchen tonight. For instance, as we continue to broadcast from the comforts of my Lincoln home, which I'm actually getting a little bit settled here, and I'm getting some feedback that you actually like the kind of comfy backdrop. Our team here, we collaborate cooking dinner each night. I sort of come in and start it off, I got my food bag and I just bump it up with a bit more protein, and then the boys come in. This is Dan and Joel, who are currently in my dining room, which is, newsroom. And of course, everybody does their little role to get everything together to bring you the show. It's sort of an unexpected type of collaboration, but of course we have a desired outcome. It's called 7 p.m. They say alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much, and that is at the heart of Sarah's Country's wonderful partnership with the great team at Farmers Weekly, who bring you New Zealand's most trusted source of agri-journalism, both online at farmersweekly.co.nz and the great analysis of our markets from Agri HQ. Tonight, I would love our live audience, wherever you are tuning in from, to help us collaborate around one of our biggest problems that we have here. Something that we're trying to solve around the dinner table. This is real. Where is Joel and his partner Sarah going to visit in their trip around the North Island? Joel, we know how passionate when we throw out about favourite places you want to visit. The comments do blow up. This is quite exciting. So let's start by suggesting, where have you got a framework of when you're going to go and where you're going to start from? And we're looking for some holes of suggestions.
Well, we're starting in Christchurch. We're hiring a camper van here, and then we're making our way up at the start of October, spending most of October traveling around, probably going up the west coast and then back down either the middle or down the south, and then back by the end of October.
Okay, so we're going west coast, meaning out up through the Manawatu, Wanganui, Taranaki, up through to Waitomo, beautiful, through the King Country there, Waitomo Caves. Will you go as far as Auckland and Northland?
Yeah, so we're definitely going to Auckland. We might go past there. It just depends on time. We're just trying to figure it all out right now.
I'll give you another week off. It's okay.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm joking. I'm totally joking. And then coming back down, Bay of Plenty. Have you thought about through the Coromandel?
Oh yeah, no, we're definitely going to try and get through the Coromandel.
And then you were saying down through the middle, so Taupo, down through to Hawke's Bay?
Potentially, yep.
Okay, so what are we looking for tonight in the comments?
Oh, anything cultural or I don't know. I'd like a bit of wildlife photography, so we'll definitely be stopping at Zealandia and anywhere that we can find like that. Any wee day trumps or anything like that. That'll be good.
Okay, I want live in the comments below. Where would you recommend to Joel? Anybody who might want to put Joel up, because we know what rural hospitality is like, and his partner Sarah on their trip around the North Island across October. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. And of course, I'm going to put this to our guests. Of course, turning to those guests and our stories tonight. After 7:20, farmers are being encouraged to have a plan B up their sleeve if feed supplies do not flourish over the spring season. AgFirst New Zealand Director James Allen is going to join us as he doesn't want to see the dire situation that we had in this year's drought in both Hawke's Bay, Northland and majority of the parts of the North Island. Cannabis consumption will increase should voters choose to legalise its recreational use, say some reports. Now, after 7:30, we're going to get the thoughts of an experienced ex-senior sergeant, Glenn Dobson, who now works for the Drug Detection Agency. He's suggesting that employers need to move on this more to deter its use in the workplace and look for ways to be able to bring that into their team culture. This is, of course, testing. To close the show at 7:45, MPI has imposed the temporary suspension following the maritime tragedy of Gulf Livestock 1 off the coast of Japan earlier this month. Exporter Brent Wallace is going to join us to share his fears that the decision of waiting for government is crippling farmers' income. We want to hear from his experience not only offshore, but of course here at home. First up on the show, though, we're talking collaboration. This is rather than competition in the heart of what is the Farmers Weekly's newsmaker. Peter Wren-Hilton is going to join us very shortly on his journey over the past 2 years in establishing Agritech NZ as he steps down now to hand over the reins in good stead. This is Sarah's Country. Well, with a lack of collaboration between government departments, which were instead largely working in silos, Agritech NZ was born. The organisation has closely been involved in putting together the recently launched Agritech Industry Transformation Plan. This is a 2-year plan with $11.4 million of government funding to address some of the challenges facing the sector. The member-funded organisation is now a key connection point for innovators, investors, researchers and regulators wanting to utilise technology to increase productivity and maximise profitability in the primary sector. The man at the helm is stepping down. Peter Wren-Hilton is Farmers Weekly's newsmaker this week, written by journalist Colin Willis-Crofton, joins us now. Evening, Peter. Welcome to Sarah's Country. I know this is not going to be the last time we talk to you, but I'm really looking forward to sharing your journey with everyone tonight. So let's start by going back to 2015 when you and your wife, Jackie, were based in Silicon Valley. How did you first become aware of the potential for New Zealand's future investment into agritech?
Well, first of all, Sarah, thank you for the opportunity of joining you this evening. 2015 was a really interesting year. As you said, Jackie and myself were based in Sunnyvale in Silicon Valley, and we saw a tremendous increase in the amount of investment taking place into this new asset class called agritech, but realized very early on that very little of that increased investment was coming over to New Zealand. So in 2015, we came back to the country, and I guess it took us probably no more than a few months to realize that one of the challenges that we faced was that the government was pretty siloed. Because we have a small market, a lot of our companies were competing with each other, so duopolies rather than collaborating. And it took us 2 years to really sit down with government agencies, major agribusinesses, to see how we could begin to develop this kind of collaborative framework. So by the time we got to May 2018, we were able to establish Agritech New Zealand. Today, it's a very significant organization with 160 corporate members. We've recently amalgamated with the Precision Agricultural Association. And as you said, I think the biggest achievement in the last 12, 15 months has been the work we've done with government to get the Agritech industry transformation plan across the line. That happened 2 months ago with Damien O'Connor and Phil Twyford. The two ministers launched it in Tauranga at Zespri. And so far as I was concerned, that was really the key moment. And one of the key moments when I decided it was time to potentially move on, because we'd achieved really what we'd set out to achieve 5 years ago. And now we have a kind of new focus, which is very much more focused on global footprints and how can we develop New Zealand Agritech's global footprint at a time when our borders are closed. So that's our kind of new venture.
Peter, where do wonderful people like you swoop in and smack heads together and just make things happen? What was your background leading into this?
Well, my background, I guess, is I first came over to New Zealand in 2003. And so I've been around for quite a time. Started working for a small tech company called Apple Computers. That's when we were called Apple back in 1990, so 30 years ago. I was there when we actually had to borrow $100 million from Microsoft to stay alive. You can't believe that now as Apple goes through the kind of the $2 trillion market cap. But no, I've been around for a little while. And Jackie and myself, we set up businesses in Hong Kong, in India. We set up our first research and development company in Bangalore in 2001. We worked with British Telecom and some big players back in the late 90s. So we have been around the block. And obviously for us, I guess this last 5 years has been one of our biggest achievements to actually bring together such an important part of the New Zealand agri sector together to make a big difference.
One of my first introductions to the agri-tech sector was a wonderful gentleman who, I just Googled it, he says he's retired on LinkedIn, but I highly doubt it, Colin Brown, from TrackMap. And Colin said to me, what New Zealand misses is we are the best test market for agri-tech in the world. Is that true? And are we maximising that opportunity?
So I think it's, first of all, I'll come back to Colin in just a moment. So just in terms of that comment, I think we're not making best use. And there are two reasons for that. One is certainly in terms of our geographic size, there's a much bigger potential for New Zealand to attract offshore research and development down to New Zealand. But the other thing is we're not really leveraging the dual hemisphere opportunity of basically looking at Northern Hemisphere based companies that when their cropping season comes to an end or their livestock, their calving season comes to an end, they could actually continue to do research and development down in the Southern Hemisphere. And I don't think we've leveraged that to the fullest extent. But back to Colin, who I know very well. Colin came on my first trip to Silicon Valley back in 2016. When we took about 25 people across there with Callahan Innovation, and I introduced Colin and TrackMap to Salinas, to the Western growers. And we got back from that trip. 6 months later, Colin announced that he was going to permanently remove himself from New Zealand, go to Salinas, and set up TrackMap US. So that was a really great example of how we managed to connect a New Zealand agritech company with a big offshore market. And that, I guess, is part and parcel of what we're looking to do going forward from here. How
do we also fear that we don't lose our, our IP early to Series A investor venture capital early on within those developments? I'm thinking of the likes of Hawke.
Yep. So again, a great question. I think one of the things that we've seen in the last 12 months has been the introduction of particularly Series A venture money into New Zealand. And so, as you're probably aware, Finisterre Ventures, who are based out of San Diego, ironically co-founded by a Kiwi and an Aussie. So Ara Makukatai is the Kiwi, originally a South Taranaki dairy farmer, but now runs a multi-million-dollar fund. Recently announced that they were establishing a dedicated fund in Palmerston North out of the factory. They're working with the new Sprout technology incubator. And what they're looking to do is to invest in New Zealand companies and keep those companies in New Zealand. A great example of that very recently has been the acquisition of Region, by an Israeli-based company called CropX, and CropX are actually going to relocate to New Zealand. So CropX, if you go back about 10 years ago, came out of Landcare. There was some offshore investment, went to Israel, is now en route back to New Zealand. So I think if we play the game effectively, we can actually retain those companies here in New Zealand.
And Peter, I mean, we had Brooke Marshall on, the commercialisation manager from AgResearch the other day. Fantastic woman, coming from her IP background. The work that you've done with our Crown research institutions to make sure our science is commercialised and retaining that value here. Tell us more about that.
Well, this is one of the key parts of the Agritech industry transformation plan. So the transformation plan contains 6 work streams, and one of the key work streams is around commercialization. And that's how can government and industry support Crown Research Institutes, whether it's agri-research or plant and food or land care, actually commercialize their IP. And I mean, that's one of the things which New Zealand's very good at. We've got incredible science, incredibly deep technology, but actually getting it to market has been traditionally a challenge. Part of that, I think, has been down just to the lack of capital to actually take it from what I might call prototype stage to something that's a fully fledged product. And so that is one of the key work streams within the ITP. So my expectation over the next 2 years is that government and the private sector will work with CRIs and our universities to see how we can better commercialize that great science that they undertake.
Now, if you're just joining us, outgoing director of Agritech New Zealand, Peter Wren-Hilton, is this week's Farmers Weekly's newsmaker. To close, let's talk about the size of our, which has been described as flatlining for some time, around that 1 billion mark. Israel's achieving 10 times that. Where do you believe, what would be your next satisfaction to see in the next 5 to 10 years for New Zealand's agri-tech industry in terms of value?
Well, you're absolutely right with those numbers. My understanding is that the sector has generated about $1.2 to $1.4 billion worth of exports. That's product and service over the last 5 years. But we've pretty much flatlined. When I compare that performance to Israel or even Holland, it's simply not commensurate with the scale and size of our agricultural sector. I think one of the challenges traditionally is that we've produced great tech for a type of farming that most people don't use. So if you look at New Zealand and you think of our pastoral farming kind of tradition, very few countries around the world actually use pastoral farming as their core base. So you have a much more industrial-based farming systems in parts of Europe, in parts of North America. So we've created great tech that people don't actually very often need because they're looking at different farming systems. So what I'm hoping that the ITP will do, and certainly some of the work that Jackie and myself will do going forward, is identifying areas of agriculture where New Zealand technology can play a really important role. And just one example, one of those areas I think is around robotics and automation. We've got fantastic examples of companies in New Zealand like Robotics Plus out of Tauranga, who are producing some fantastic robotic work. And that can clearly appeal to people like Western growers in North America, who produce 50% of all their fresh produce, but right now have got massive issues around labor, as we do at certain times of the season, whether it's kiwi fruit in the Bay of Plenty or apples in Hawke's Bay or grapes in Marlborough. There's these kind of crunch picking seasons where there aren't, frankly, enough laborers, people actually picking the fruit. So can New Zealand take its robotic and automation technology and sell that offshore more effectively? I believe it can, but it's going to require a little bit of effort from both the private sector and government to work together to make that possible.
Now, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, stepping down at the helm of Agritech New Zealand. And I know that this won't be the last challenge that you are involved in. I do want to take the time to ask you, you're out based in the North Island, and tonight we are crowdsourcing Joel Rock, the producer of Serious Country's itinerary for him and his partner. What is your recommendation of where he should visit?
I'm not a very biased person, so I would certainly recommend Tauranga and the Mount and the Bay of Plenty, not least because of the great kind of food and the beaches we've got, but certainly from an Agritech perspective, we've also got an amazing range of great companies there, a lot of whom are involved in the horticultural sector. So obviously you've got kind of Zespri there, but you've got great companies like Blue Lab and Trimax. You've got Plantech, the regional research institute that's looking at automation of horticulture, Robotics Plus, I've already mentioned. So if you want to combine the best of Agritech with some of the best beaches in New Zealand and some of the finest weather, then there really is no better place than Tauranga and the Mount. So I would focus my time very much in that region if I was Joel.
Joel, what do you think about going and visiting an amazing robotics company, watching them pick kiwi fruit with a robot?
I mean, that sounds pretty cool, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, Sarah's a vet, and I'm sure she wants to do lots of tramping and bits and pieces. But Peter, potentially we could get Joel to have a look through our amazing agri-tech companies in New Zealand. He's a techie, of course. He's obviously involved in media and switching, live streaming and all sorts of things. So robots would be right up your alley.
I have seen some pretty cool
Fantastic.
robots. Yeah.
Great and of course, we've also got GPS it. How can I forget Matt and GPS it with their amazing drone technology as well? So robots on the ground, drones in the air. A perfect idea of what farms and orchards will look like in the future. The kind of the digital farm or the digital orchard.
I think you tickled his fancy when you said the word drone. Thank you so much, Peter, Wren-Hilton, and best wishes with the next chapter. And please don't go too far from touching the sides and influencing our agri-tech sector here in New Zealand. Congratulations on an incredible success over the past couple of years. And thank you on behalf of our industry for everything that you have contributed. Really appreciate having a yarn to you over the course of this time. As I was just saying, we are crowdsourcing Joel Rock and his girlfriend partner Sarah's trip around the North Island. Joel's decided to take a well-deserved holiday in October. I'd like you, wherever you are watching live, to put in your suggestions of where Joel should visit. I will read them out throughout the rest of the show. Now, coming up in Sarah's country, we're going to be joined by James Allen out of the Waikato. He is an AgFirst consultant and urging farmers to consider alternatives with regards to feed supply going into the summer again, and it could potentially be just as dry as the last. All that up next on Sarah's Country. This is Sarah's Country.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
like electric fencing,
or horse feed,
or bee suits,
children,
chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help your farm,
Grow, milk, drench.
rear, come on in.
Because we're out here too.
Well, for those who have just joined us, welcome to Sarah's Country. Tonight, throughout the show, we are crowdsourcing. It's quite a trendy word, for Joel Rock's trip around the North Island in October. So if you are a big fan of some hot spots in the North Island, wherever you are watching live, get amongst and let's put some places for Joel and his partner Sarah to visit. We know there is so many beautiful parts of the North Island that our tourists may not know about. And of course, in rural New Zealand, we certainly do have some wonderful places to treasure to show, of course, our Irish friends. Now, as there has been some ideal conditions across the country for lambing and calving, there has been some concerns around soil moisture levels and bore levels this spring. AgFirst consultant James Allen has been appointed by MPI this season to keep a watchful eye around pasture growth and, of course, feed supplies from the big learnings that we had last summer. And James joins us now. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Sarah. How are you?
Good, good. So could you set the scene for us as of the 22nd of September, where we are at across the country?
Sure. Well, as most farmers would appreciate, we've gone through a very tough autumn, one of the toughest on record for many farmers. Then we've had, for most farms, a remarkably mild winter, which has been great. And as of today, so we've had good utilisation. And many farmers are saying, I haven't needed to use the raincoat much in the last few months, which has been wonderful. The downside to this is farmers are nervous at the moment. The soil moisture levels are reasonably low, and certainly in the lower parts of the South Island, they're lower than they should be. And equally, there's nervousness around the bore levels in many parts of the country, bores and aquifers leading into the summer. So while conditions are great at the moment, there's a degree of nervousness around.
Yeah, what too much around being very dry. And now, of course, in terms of the toolkit, that plan A in the cupboard, when you're saying those feed levels are low and we're in September, what can you start to think about early?
Well, if we look at this time, say, compared to a year ago, last year, due to a number of reasons, we had good feed reserves on many, many farms. And so we had excellent feed buffers and silage and hay to carry into the summer. As of today, on most farms, the cupboard is empty. So we really are hoping for a good silage and hay making season over the next few weeks. So in some of the things to think about there, Sarah, we'll split it down into your feed supply and your feed demand side of things. And I suppose on the feed supply, it's being really careful with your feed planning right now, maximising your silage making and your hay making. Some farmers will use strategic use of nitrogen, use it carefully and wisely, maybe to make some good silage there. But also there's more farmers putting in forage crops and also maize crops as well, just to build up those feed buffers once again. And then on the demand side of it, it's just planning it out really and making sure that your feed demand is appropriate for the time of year as we lead into the summer, and thinking about if things getting dry, what triggers what levers can you pull to adjust things as we head into summer?
For those watching live, we do apologise for James' connection. It is looking like its own interesting weather pattern there on the screen, but we are having you come through nice and clear, James. So I will continue with this. Let's look at what is ahead, the La Nina alert status, and what do you believe we should be focusing on in terms of these weather patterns over the next couple of months?
Sure. I think the key thing with the La Nina coming through is that it's regionally different. So take note of what it means for your particular region. And for the next couple of months, for example, La Nina may mean for the northern part of the North Island slightly more rainfall, where for many parts of the South Island it'll be below average. So take careful note of what the forecasters are saying, and once again, updating your feed plan to make sure it's appropriate to what's going on.
Let's talk about stock on hand and stocking rates. There was a lot of criticism around potentially that farmers held on to stock for too long, but at the end of the day it comes down to what they're getting paid, and that's why they held it onto it when there were so many market forces at play. I mean, the word "a perfect storm" really, really did come into play in this autumn. What would be your advice going forward when you can't predict things like pandemics?
Sure. Look, we can't predict everything, not at all. But over the years, I suppose I observe when we get dry, there is a tendency in high product price environments just to hang on a little bit longer than what we should. And inevitably what will happen if it goes dry, in the dairy scene, the supplement prices tend to rise, and in the sheep and beef scene, the market prices fall and the growth rates fall as well. So while we think we're winning, often we're not. So it's very, very tempting, but the best advice we can give really is to have a plan and have those trigger levels in place. So when we get to, say, 1st of December, what are your growth rates? What are your pasture covers? What are the soil moistures doing? And writing those down now so you don't get tempted later on in the season just to, put another dollar on the table to hope that it gets better later on.
James, I do want to stay away from asking you too many political questions. However, we did have James Shaw on the show last night, and he's talking about a fertiliser levy, and he's talking about banning palm kernel. We're talking about a toolkit. He's taking quite a few tools out of that kit and throwing that away when farmers really do get to a tight point where there's not too many other options. And your position at AgFirst and as a consultancy there, how do you navigate that in terms of a risk environment on regulation as well?
Oh, look, it's just another layer of complications, Sarah, and you're well aware of some of the proposals by the Green Party, and probably less enthusiastic about many of them, I suppose. And as you say, we're just removing many of those levers that we could be using. And particularly palm kernel was widely used throughout last season as a buffer and as a way to get through. And if that's removed from our system, we're realistically talking about a major change in farm systems, and ultimately it will be a reduction in productivity on farm.
How can we future-proof our farms if drought is becoming a part of our future?
Sure. There's a number of ways. In the short term, it's about having really careful planning and monitoring of what's going on, but it's also thinking about what sort of crops can we put in place in terms of forage cropping, maize reserves, etc., just to make sure we do have more buffers on hand. Also, don't forget the simple one about financial reserves as well. I think it's often overlooked as a buffer for our farm systems. Longer term, you will have no doubt been talking to many of the scientists at Ag Research who are looking at more resilient pasture species, cropping species, and of course livestock that are a bit more resilient as well.
James, you've got the ear of MPI and the position that they have put you in to advise them and keep that watchful eye over pasture levels. What would be your biggest advice back to MPI and our learnings from last season around how we handle our response to adverse events in this country? Farmers do not want a handout. However, the ability for MPI to support them. What was your learnings and what would you like to see in the coming years?
Sure. A couple of things, Sarah. I'm working with MPI and a number of people just to try and help them with better forecasting of information to understand what's going on and early. So MPI are well informed as early as possible to make some of the big calls. The other observation really, and I look at the Hawke's Bay in particular, and the tremendous efforts that went on there, and really a shout out to the Poppy Renton, Mark Harris, and Lockie McGillivrays of this world, who just put in such a big effort there. And while the government is there to assist, that community got up and got itself going and did some wonderful things. And I think no matter what MPI will do, it has to come back to a community approach to really make it work.
Absolutely. What a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much. And before you go, we are crowdsourcing some wonderful places in the North Island. I've already given Joel my list. What is your recommendations for where they head to?
Oh, the North Island is a magic place. So Joel has to see all of it. And the top three would have to be Hot Water Beach, the Wanganui River, and the Tongariro Crossing.
Oh, absolutely. Fantastic. Joel, you could trial yourself, put your hand to a bit of fly fishing, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's been a while since I picked up a fresh
We've got
rod.
some good fly fishermen in our team here, so happy to assist.
There we go. I think that you're going to get quite a few things. And if you are listening on demand on podcast, please send in Sarah at Sarah's Country your recommendations. And if you'd like to billet Joel and put them up or show him some of your favourite attractions, please send them in because, of course, We are the most hospitable nation in the world. That's what I strongly believe here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we look after our visitors. And Joel and his partner Sarah are going to have a fantastic time. Now, coming up after the break, we are going to be talking about cannabis. Peter Gow's doing it. We're going to do it as well. The impairment of your ability to work with this drug is, of course, not great in our primary sector with such high risk of health and safety and workplace. I have to admit that I painted a wall hungover, and I'm never going to do that again. You're absolutely impaired. Cannabis is 70% of those drugs that are tested by the Drug Detection Agency, and the Chief Operating Officer, Glenn is going to join us next after the break. Glenn Dobson, my sincerest apologies. And then we're going to talk about cannabis in the workplace. This is Sarah's Country.
Balance has its own team of innovation specialists. It's our job to lead the way, working with some of the most cutting-edge science and research. We've got partnerships with some of the best suppliers in the world, so our farmers get the very best products for New Zealand farms.
And in every region across the country, the conditions are very different, and farmers' and growers' needs are too.
That's why we're always looking for solutions that are just right, like here at our Huntly Service Centre.
And here in Canterbury, we've got a self-service silo, so I can pick up fat when it suits me.
And here in Morrinsville, we've got a world-class mill. That means that we can safely deliver our customers with the freshest, highest quality feed and minerals.
It's about putting the customer first, because that's what drives our business.
We've been focusing on faster turnaround of orders. We've got to get the right products to the right places at the right times.
Here in Taranaki, we've got New Zealand's only urea manufacturing plant. It's where we create our premium sustained fertiliser.
We're supplying nationwide and working locally. By getting to know you and what you want to achieve, we can help you get there.
And with the new My Balance platform, Balance has put my farm at my fingertips.
In fact, we offer support in all sorts of ways, sharing the best nutrition practice with farming families across the country. Whether we're talking about animal health, farm productivity,
or looking after our natural environment, sustainability underpins everything we do. We use our local expertise and the latest tools to help farmers and growers navigate the changing regulations, so you can leave your farm in great shape for the future.
And we can be really accurate, avoiding areas like wetlands and waterways with our award-winning Spread Smart tech. It makes the job far safer, more efficient, and gives you the best results.
When you've got access to that kind of know-how, you've got the support you need to make sure you're farming sustainably. It's that kind of thinking that'll keep us going for generations to come.
Together creating the best soil and feed on earth.
Well, each year the Drug Detection Agency conducts 200,000 random drug tests for businesses in New Zealand, of which they find traces of drugs in 5% of those tests. Now, of that 5%, 70% is cannabis, but a number have traces of multiple drugs in their system as well. So should employers in the primary sector fear the impending regulation changes to recreational use of cannabis here in New Zealand at the referendum at next month's election? Glenn Dobson has been a senior sergeant in the New Zealand Police, specialising in drugs, worked as a safety manager for the Christchurch City Council, led the team of the National Manager of Coroner's Office, and this is all before he joined the Drug Detection Agency, now as Chief Operating Officer. Glenn joins us now. Welcome to Sarah's Country, Glenn.
Good to be here. Thanks very much.
Firstly, excuse me, how do you work with employers to actually see out and conduct these drug tests?
Yeah, look, I guess one of the first questions we'll always ask an employer when we speak to them is what are they trying to achieve? It's incredibly important that the drug testing program that employers put in their workplace works for them. Every workplace is different and it has to fit within their culture. So it's important from the Drug Detection Agency's perspective that we understand what they're trying to achieve and then fit a program or a regime that works for their unique workplace and for their people. It's incredibly important that everyone is well informed, that it's open and honest, and there are good conversations around it, and it's based on a solid policy document that really sets out the expectations of both the employer and the employees.
It must be a real balance because, of course, in a great culture in a workplace is trust, but there's at the same time balancing that communication with we're trying to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, it is a balance, and it's sometimes a tightrope that employers have to walk. Employers have got a huge amount of responsibility on them, and one of those ones that TDA deal with and work with employers is around the Health and Safety at Work Act, and that says that every employer has to manage risks within the workplace, and it actually lists drugs and alcohol as a recognised risk in the workplace. So they've got a fiduciary duty to make sure they manage those risks properly, and that's through various ways, including drug and alcohol policy, education, testing, the whole lot.
Okay, so how impaired in your experience, and of course you're a senior sergeant in that introduction, is workers under the influence of cannabis in the workplace, and more so than, let's say, being hungover at work?
Yeah, This impairment question is quite a tricky one. With workplace drug testing, we'll carry out a number of different, drug tests, whether it's urine test and oral fluid test. We also do hair sampling to see drug presence within the person's hair as well. And each of those will sit in a different reason and sit within a different rationale. But one thing toxicology doesn't measure is it doesn't measure impairment. And it's a difficult conversation. It's a terminology that we need to get away from a little bit. It's actually managing for employers the risk of impairment. And if drugs are present in the workplace, then there's a risk that impairment is there. And certainly in safety sensitive roles, if you're talking about farming in the country and so forth, you've got a lot of heavy machinery. You've got a lot of workers that may be remote and away from help and so forth. And if their judgment or if their physical abilities are affected by drugs, then there's a risk that will create a hazard on their workplace.
I do really want to come back to this culture around it, and I'm just taking it from, say, for instance, an employer's perspective, and they're listening and watching to this, and they go, we'd just like to be able to bring it in a way that we don't feel like we're targeting anyone specifically, that it's just something we randomly do just to keep everybody safe. How would you suggest that employers can bring up that conversation and build it into just a policy of work?
Look, quite often what we encourage workplaces to do, and a lot of workplaces do have, are like toolbox sessions. In the mornings before the start of shift, they may be talking about something new that's in the workplace. They may be talking about some new policies or processes they're doing, but also they may be talking about health and safety. And as you described it there, is a really good way for an employer just to bring it up. Hey, look, your guys' safety is incredibly important to me. I not only have a responsibility under legislation to manage your safety, but actually I really care about you guys, and I want to make sure that you guys get home to your families, to your loved ones, to your kids at the end of the day. And I'm sure you feel the same for your colleagues as well. And one of the risks that I really want to talk about is drugs in the workplace. I have to manage it. And I have to make sure you guys are safe, and here's some ways that we can manage that, and start discussing that and have a conversation around the reasons why and so forth.
Absolutely. Now let's talk and move now to this referendum. There's a BERL report that's calculated that if it's come in, 420 cannabis outlets will be established, greater than KFC, McDonald's and Burger King combined. So making this readily available, what is your greatest concern in all your experience, both in the police force and now at the Drug Detection Agency, that these legislation changes to cannabis will make it very hard? Will it change the culture around this workplace environment?
Yeah, look, I think so. One of the really interesting parts of that BERL report around the cannabis outlets is, number one, that's the number that they found would be financially viable. Like any business, there may be more numbers, but that's the number they came around that would be financially viable. But not only that, I guess for your audience, 117 of those 420 are in rural townships. So that's a lot in the rural townships themselves. So, it's a target audience for them. But the concerns from the Drug Detection Agency is really around if cannabis becomes legalised, access will be increased. more increased access for people to cannabis will increase cannabis effects in the workplace, will increase the risks of the dangers of the drugs, and also the risks that workers will bring to their own colleagues and so forth. That's our biggest concern.
But at the same time, there has been reports that contradict that as well. And with legalisation, potentially there'll be more testing, and so therefore the levels of THC could be managed in terms of the strength.
Yeah, look, all you got to do is look at some of the, the overseas examples. I mean, let's look at a bit of history and learn from other countries' mistakes, I guess, or learn from their experiences, I should say. It's no secret that the USA, a number of states in the USA, have gone through a lot of legalisation around the states. And of all those states that have gone through legalisation of cannabis, all of them have seen an increase in the THC that's been found in the workplace when they've been doing drug testing. That then means that there's more cannabis in the workplace. That increases the risk. If I was an employer, I'd be incredibly concerned about that.
It said there 70% of the drug traces that you found are cannabis. I want to talk about that other 30% because I do worry about hard drugs in rural New Zealand and employers being able to keep their families, their communities and their staff safe from this. And it certainly could be on the rise in certain areas as well. I mean, what's your fear, and what are some of those biggest drugs that are really affecting our country?
Yeah, look, it's no secret that cannabis is probably the most commonly available drug in New Zealand. And of our positive tests, cannabis does show up roughly about 70% of the time. But often we'll see our positive drug results have multiple drugs in there, what's known as polydrug use, multiple drugs. The second most common drug, again, is no secret, it's in the media all the time, it's methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is a scourge in society, as is any drug abuse. And behind that, we're starting to see some real issues around prescription drug abuse. Drugs, funny enough, are like any sort of consumable out there. They go through trends. And some of those trends are around the use of drugs. What we're starting to see at lower numbers, but certainly seen, is an increase in cocaine that's available out there at the moment. Recently, we've seen a few hits or a few positive test results around synthetic cannabis, AB Fubinaca, recently. Now, that's the same synthetic cannabis that was in the media a couple of years ago that's caused over 60 deaths and is in front of the coroner's court at the moment. So we see some trends, we see some drugs come and go, but certainly the main baseline is cannabis and methamphetamine.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Glenn is from the Drug Detection Agency. Coming up after the break, live exporters fear the valuable income that farmers will lose as an independent inquiry by the Ministry for Primary Industries after a halt on live exports carries on. Brent Wallace will join us shortly to talk about how crippling this is for the industry. This is Sarah's Country.
Really pleased we got into this. Thanks for your help, Dave.
It's a good idea, honey. You reckon it'll come out? Cover it in talcum powder, leave it 10 minutes, you'll be fine. Good call, Dave.
Good call on getting those security cameras, Dave.
You call a new one yet?
Yeah, kind of.
When you've got decisions to make, we'll be there to help you make the right call.
I'd go for those ones, Bob. Yeah, good call.
Did you choose these?
Oh, you know.
For great advice and insurance, talk to FMG.
Well, there is many farmers across this country who have animals bound for quarantine or in quarantine that are being told that they will not be able to receive payment from exporters. And this is a flow-on effect from MPI's halt on live export following the missing ship of Gulf Livestock 1. And of course, an independent inquiry is underway and many questions are on the table. But of course, there's a sense of urgency, yet a sense to get it right. Joining us now is one of the experienced livestock exporters, Brent Wallace, who joins us now from Arrowtown. Good evening, Brent. Thank you for taking the time to join us and share both your experience as well as your concerns. Firstly, let's start with your experience. You're from Gore originally. Tell our audience a bit about your background within this industry.
I left, obviously, New Zealand when I was 22. Ended up working at a sheep feedlot over in Western Australia, with sort of the goal in mind to get onto the export boats. Got onto one pretty soon after starting, and then sort of did about 6 years sailing, and then from on there I've sort of been involved with the procurement side of stock for export out of Australia and New Zealand. And then, obviously, last couple of years I've spent a lot of time up in Vietnam and China with the, through the supply chain for a feeder and slaughter cattle.
So you've got a lot of experience in Australia and now working back here, exporting cattle. How do we differ in terms of New Zealand's industry to the likes of Australia's live export industry?
Australia, in a whole, it's self-regulated within the exporters. Sheep-wise, cattle-wise, there's big numbers going out. Rules, regulations are slightly similar, but very different. But just, I think the Australians, obviously, it's a industry which is, I think, worth $9 billion to their economy. They do it pretty well, and I think for us going forward, obviously with what's happened, we need to sort of, I guess, lean on Big Brother a little bit and just do things a little bit differently. Now
we have to acknowledge that it will have been pretty deep what's happened, and how has it been for you over the past couple of weeks?
It's been pretty tough. I didn't know the guys on board at all, but when you've worked in that environment, been, in those conditions, it's pretty tough. And when you've sort of been around it for a little bit with as a vet or as a stockman on board, we become a fairly close-knit group of people. So it's pretty tough.
In our introduction, we are talking about the farmers here in New Zealand and the flowback effect of the valuable income. What is happening on the ground with 25,000 cattle? Explain to our audience about the flow-on effect all the way back and how they can't just simply be sent to the works or sent back to the farm.
I guess the big thing right now is we've got Ian Bovis, which has been crippling for a lot of farms over the last couple of years. Logistically, it's you couldn't do it. Any farm which has had their animals in that quarantine, cattle from Southland mixing with cattle from the Waikato or Northland, it just it just sets yourself up for a major fall, But from I guess the only sort of straight answer is these cattle need to get clearance to go, and I guess over the last 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks ago it was 1 step forward, 20 backwards. This week it's 2 steps forward and 8 backwards. So we're getting there slowly, but the government need to sort of just look at the big picture of long term, short term and long term, and.
What sort of answers are you getting out of MPI with regards to being able to at least clear some of this backlog? And when could we see a next ship potentially coming down under?
Look, I haven't really been involved with that side of things too much, but there's been a real mixed message from MPI, and that's probably the problem. There's actually been no clear pathway of what's actually going on, and I think that's just no one's really put their hand up and said, well, this needs to happen. It needs to happen sort of sooner rather than later. It's been obviously pushed back, my understanding, until after the elections of when the first boat can go. But still not 100% in stone sort of thing.
No surprises there. I don't really want to deal with it leading into an election. That's very inconvenient, isn't it, as well? And I just really feel for those who are paying out of their own pocket to feed those animals in quarantine. Can you give us an understanding of that cost to keep them in good state?
The cost, for quarantine for China, for protocols, is 30 days minimum. And generally when you sort of lead in with your cattle off farm, those cattle could be there up to sort of 40 to 50 days. Quarantine farms, they can charge you anywhere from $4 a head per day up to $8 a head per day. At normal size shipments, 4,000 head to 5,500. So you start looking at costs of $25,000 up to $46,000 a day sort of thing. Times that by minimum 30 days, you burn up some money pretty quickly.
And what's your sort of sense been in terms of the New Zealand government's approach to the live export industry over the past few consecutive governments? And what would you like to see happen here at home?
Oh, look, the government, to be fair, have been missing in action with this industry for as long as I've been involved. And obviously, when I first started in this, it was the sheep trade in Saudi was still going. That stopped in 2003. It's just been put to one side and never really, it's just ticked away, out of sight, out of mind sort of thing. Obviously, with what's happened now, they've got to actually do a bit of a catch up. My feeling is where Labor get back in, whoever the agriculture minister is, whoever the trade minister is, they need to actually start talking to us, start understanding that what we're doing is actually a pretty well-oiled machine of what we do on how we go about it, and actually once travel starts happening, get over to these countries where these animals are going and actually get an understanding that they are actually getting well looked after. That's the biggest thing I feel is there's been no actual, they only assume what's happening overseas,
Okay, so, you put your cattle on a truck and send it along to the Temuka sale. It could be on the truck for a couple of hours in terms of live weight loss, and we've got a system here in terms of Transport in New Zealand. That feed on the ship, and how well are they looked after? You've been a stock person involved in this for many years, and prior to that a shepherd. Can you give us an understanding of, how much feed they put on, sort of live weight gain they put on in that journey and how well you look after them?
I guess I did a trip up into Russia last year. It was 44 days at sea. We had 3,553 animals on board. We lost 3. And we probably put a weight gain of, 50 plus kilos on these animals. Give you an understanding of a shipment of, let's say, 5,500, they're probably eating up to 38 tonnes per day. So what works out various, depending on animal size, weight. They could be eating anywhere from 6 kilos up to 15 kilos a day sort of thing.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely fantastic in terms of the way that they are cared for. And I think reading this article here from Annette Scott, who is following this very closely in depth for Farmers Weekly as it continues to evolve, is our relationship with China is also under risk because it's a huge part to the agricultural industry, our relationship with China when it comes to live export as well, and making sure, of course, that they are looked after at the other end. It's not drop off, see you later. What is that like ongoing after they have been delivered?
Yeah, look, the last couple of years, I mean, I've spent a lot of time up there. Obviously, when you organising all, I guess you try and get a relationship with the importers, but the biggest thing is you want to know where these animals are going to end up. And look, I've spent weeks away from home, just looking at quarantine facilities, where they're going on farm, where they're going to end up, and for most of it, it's just you're getting there just to making sure that they are actually going to be looked after, and that's probably the frustrating part for myself, is when you've got the animal rights people, the government have no understanding of that. You've got to look at these animals of their value, of what the Chinese are paying, and it's not some backyard farm which wants 5 or 10 heifers to milk for their family, and they are going into well set up farms, and I guess when you look at production wise, when you take an animal out of New Zealand herd, you get it up into China, and over time those animals are producing milk solids 2-3 times more than what they do here in New Zealand. I think it's fairly good indication how well they're getting looked after, And I mean, with anyone with a bit of stock knowledge will understand, one, comes down to feed, and second, if the animals aren't happy within the environment, there's no way they're going to produce that sort of production level up there. So that's, I guess, without painting a big picture, that's the guts of it, really.
Brent, thank you so much for taking the time to come on Sarah's Country tonight, because, I'm always curious in every aspect of the industry, and as is a lot of our audience across the world, and how it does all work. So you've really clarified a lot of my questions, and hopefully those listening and watching as well. We certainly wish you the best of luck when it comes to the outcomes from MPI, and that they are positive, because, it is having a drastic effect and a flow-on effect to a lot of businesses, and particularly yours. So our thoughts go out to you. Thank you so much, Brent Wallace, a livestock exporter there. And this is in turn of the news of Gulf Livestock One and MPI here in New Zealand halting exports. And as Brent said, there may be till after the election before the next boat can get away, and crippling costs of keeping those cows in quarantine. Absolutely love to have your feedback on any of the stories tonight, and any topics or guests that you would like to have on Sarah's Country. Simply email us, sarah@sarahscountry.com, and of course, for all the full in-depth stories, visit farmersweekly.co.nz. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you for the past hour, and we are going to do this all again tomorrow night. Some great guests lined up. We are going to follow, of course, the Ministry for Immigration announcing that seasonal work visas have been granted to parts of our industry, but not all. The shearing industry is a little bit upset about this, but they say it may be all at too late in the season. Doug Avery's going to talk around climate resilience. Brent Fisher from Silver Streams Charolais celebrates evolution bulls genetics across the ditch and the success that one bull is having on the beef industry. And we're going to talk hemp, heading to Southland to catch up with the team at Hopefield Hemp with Blair and Jodie Drysdale. And in the meantime, good night, go well, look after yourself, your family, and we'll do this all again tomorrow night. This is Sarah's Country.